As Dave said, my name is Michael Kavanagh. I was employed by the Land Registry in 1988 at Stevenage, transferred to Croydon as a result of the closure of the office after the ATP stuff had come into force in 2011. I'd like to first thank you for the invite to speak at the meeting. We sent Dave up to do the Durham meeting yesterday, which went very well. Again, massive turnout here from IS, your sister branch earlier on. I spoke at Peterborough the other day. Just really goes to show you how important the issues are that face us at the moment. I also want to thank you for the nomination, carry on the job next year, because without that I wouldn't have a job anyway, but it's quite good that it happened before I spoke as opposed to afterwards. And I need to be careful with the camera on that I don't say anything libelous as well, as I probably did earlier. Or certainly Dave did yesterday. Anyway, the purpose of this meeting really is to talk about the current ongoing consultation on the commercial model and its potential implications, bearing in mind everything else that's going on behind the scenes in Land Registry at the moment. And we said this probably 1,000 times at meetings, that this is the most critical time for us as members of staff within the civil service in the Land Registry, but it's probably never been truer than it is today in respect of what we potentially face. So just to give a bit of background really, there have been a number of studies, around 7, into the Land Registry status that have taken place since the early 1970s, under all political shades, it has to be said. And each of those studies has looked at whether or not it would be the right thing to do in terms of bringing a private partner or wholly privatising the Land Registry, part or all of it. And each time, regardless of who was in power politically at the time, all of those studies have come back with an unequivocal no into it's not right to privatise the Land Registry. We now find ourselves in a slightly different position, as a result of moving from the Lord Chancellor's Department many years ago as part of the core civil service, went to agency status, then went to trading fund status, and now we find ourselves, after various machinery of government changes, moving from the Ministry of Justice to the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills under Vince Cable at the moment, and the control of the shareholder executive at the Public Data Group, which includes ourselves, the Ordnance Survey, Companies House, the Met Office, etc., is that we have a very different look at things. And when the government carried out their comprehensive spending review in 2010, which was designed to reduce the deficit and as part of that reduce public sector jobs, they commissioned KPMG, the well-known management group, to undertake a feasibility study of Land Registry. But the difference with this one, in terms of all the previous studies that have been undertaken, is that they didn't ask the question, was it right to privatise the Land Registry, or would it be right to privatise the Land Registry? They asked the question, how do you privatise the Land Registry? And as a result of that, they produced a report for the Minister. It was shelved at the time because of the ongoing stuff with the Public Data Group, etc. But within that report, which we've managed to obtain as a result of a Freedom of Information Act request, and we're on the point of exposing that report at the moment, it said that the way that you would privatise the Land Registry would be to firstly to vest it into a GovCo, which we know is one of the key components, one of the key questions that's contained with the ongoing consultation document. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. In terms of the current considerations, we had discussions with the board early in 2013. It became very, very obvious that they thought, for reasons such as agility and flexibility, that they thought that moving to a GovCo would be the best option for Land Registry. And at the time they told us that that was because they would be able to have more of a free rein in terms of spending on the IT developments and the individual capability that was required to deliver the business strategy of Land Registry. Subsequent to that, it's become absolutely clear that you can deliver all of those things under the trading fund model. Management have openly admitted that, which begs the question, why is this consultation taking place? Anyway, when that announcement was made by the board, we put a detailed submission together based on, a number of responses that we'd had from members to the information that was put in to the public domain, and we sent that to the Land Registry Board. We copied it to all members at the time. We sent a copy of it to the Minister of State, Michael Fallon, and sent it round to a number of industry professionals as well. It's a well-received document, and allowed us to have meetings with the shareholder executive, management, and the Minister himself at a certain point. Subsequent to that, there's been loads of further correspondence, meetings with the shareholder executive and everybody else, and we all assumed at that point that the consultation that was going to be sent out would be a straight fight between GovCo and the status quo, Land Registry remaining as a trading fund. And that was the case right up until the very last minute, when I got a call from Ed Lester on the 20th of January, basically say to us that part privatisation elements had been introduced into the consultation. And that the main consequence of that was that the Land Registry were unable, as planned, to release the details of their target operating model. There are a couple of reasons for this, but the main one being because it was a direction from the Minister of State himself, was that if the consultation came out in favour of a part privatisation or a contracting out option, then the governance of the delivery arm of the Land Registry would be very, very different. And therefore, the people in charge at that point may not wish to pursue the same sort of target operating model that the Land Registry Board had identified. So from that point of view, it was obviously understandable, but from an organisational point of view, it was very, very embarrassing for the board, because they'd obviously worked everybody up to these big announcements, and obviously has created a number of additional anxieties. But I think that we need to see that that presents us with a number of opportunities, particularly in relation to our campaigning and shaping the way that the organisation is to run in the future. So moving on to the consultation options, although the consultation preamble does refer to the status quo of a trading fund, it actually only invites responses around the three options that are identified within the questions. And those options are the GovCo, which assumes that it will be 100% government owned, at least at first, but also clearly bearing in mind the things that we're going to reveal around the KPMG report as well, which would basically mean that the Land Registry would be split into two: an office of the Chief Land Registrar to deal with the statutory functions of the Chief Land Registrar and act as a form of regulatory body for the delivery arm. The delivery arm would be vested into a GovCo, registered at Companies House, and have its own board in terms of being able to oversee the day-to-day duties of land registration, etc. It would also, I think, clearly and importantly, allow management to implement their plans in relation to a target operating model. And I'll say a little bit more about that in detail in a little while. The other options, joint venture partnership, which would mean that again the OCLR would be set up, but the delivery arm of the organisation would be part privately owned. It doesn't go into a great deal of detail in the consultation document about how that might work and what legislation would be required in order to enact it. And then goes on, the third option is contracting out, which is basically effectively the sale of the delivery arm operations side of the organisation, again with a central body retained in government, small body to carry out and discharge the functions of the Chief Land Registrar. So what's our view in respect to this? Well, none of these three options represent the best way for the Land Registry to go forward, and all of the arguments that we've put up against privatisation in the past hold good to this day. And this will be explained in the submission that we put forward. So all of our efforts must be geared, as I think will hopefully become clear by the end of this meeting, to the retention of the trading fund status. And from the initial contact that we've had from industry professionals, it's clear that they see the GovCo as the least worst option, bearing in mind the intrinsic link between the target operating model and the GovCo, it needs to be made a little bit clearer as to what the actual implications might be. For starters, we know that the government see the GovCo as a stepping stone towards privatisation, and management's own questions and answers that have already been issued signify that it would be easier to privatise the land registry from a position of GovCo than it would be if we were to retain the trading fund status. And that's because of the need for only secondary legislation rather than primary legislation, and the lack of political scrutiny that that would afford it. And just as important, the Land Registry's TOM proposals, which we're not allowed to speak about in great detail, would be enacted quite speedily if the GovCo was chosen as the preferred option and that vesting took place some point towards the end of 2014. And it's an extremely important point that the consultation document itself does not refer to any of the potential impacts of the target operating model, both in terms of the size and the shape of the organisation, but also, as we would have seen from the VPR announcements that took place yesterday, the actual role of the conveyancers in populating the land register. It actually hints within the material that the management issued yesterday when they referred to tell, not show, that the solicitors and conveyancers will be responsible for populating the register at the front end of the registration process. And this we will have seen for some of the stuff that's come out in industry professional magazines, the Law Society's own Law Gazette, for example, is that they are highly sceptical of any moves in this direction whatsoever. And this has to be a good point for us, as I'll come on to in a second. Therefore, though, because the likely respondents to the consultations, and this was covered in the correspondence that's sort of gone back and forwards between myself and Ed Lester, that's been made public over the course of this week, that potential respondents cannot respond to the consultation from an enlightened position as to what it would mean to them and their members, unless the details of what management are preparing to do or proposing to do under the GovCo are in the public domain. And that remains a critical point for all of us. And what we've said that we're going to do is that when we lodge our consultation response, probably in the early part of next week, based again on a lot of the responses that we've had from members already, is to make it clear to industry professionals that things will be very, very different if they go for GovCo. It wouldn't necessarily be the least worst option, both in terms of the service they're getting from us at the moment and their own role actually going forward, and that they need to bear it in that mind in the consultation. The early signs from them already, when they haven't been put in a position of knowledge, is that again they are highly sceptical of the options that are on the table. And we'll keep everybody posted on this vital issue.